Okay, welcome back. Second time is the charm today. I hope you enjoyed the lunch. Thank you for coming inside. It's a really beautiful day, so we really appreciate your attention. And a brief intro, I suppose. I just moved to Cascadia. I am a proud Cascadian resident for 6 months. Very excited about it. I grew up in Florida. I've lived outside the States for 12 years and just moved back. So really excited to participate at this very interesting time. I am also an advisor with BioFi project. And I also was picking up garbage and setting up chairs the last days and really enjoying being behind the scenes. And Josh asked if I would moderate our next section of listening and also participation. We're going to have 3 incredible talks. People who are really working right now on experimenting and working with Indigenous-led initiatives, working with different stakeholder groups across different belief systems, different ontologies and ways of thinking to see what can we do in integrating and employing new models of economics and how we assign value and how we activate our local communities to work together towards not overshooting planetary boundaries and meeting people's basic needs, making sure people have food, making sure people have housing and affordable housing, clean water. How do we clean up the sludge in the Duwamish River? Who is responsible for that? So many people activating and trying to collaborate across different organizations. So I'm going to introduce our first speakers. We're going to have 3 15-minute talks, and then we're going to get really interactive and have a panel of these speakers and be passing around a microphone to you all. So listening in, and maybe if you have a question that comes up during one of the presentations, if you want to hold it in your mind or jot it down, we're going to have just about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, depending, for an active discussion with the folks that are going to present now. So the first friends that I would like to bring up is Miss Zoe Ton and Megan Statura, who are working with Seattle Donut Economics. They are championing this to collaborate across organizations, civic level government, nonprofits, to get together and figure out how do we align Seattle's economies with not overshooting planetary boundaries and making sure that people have their needs met in the current context, which of course is rapidly changing with technology and politics and everything else going on. So please welcome to the stage with a nice warm round of applause, Megan and Zoe, and get your questions ready.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. Great. So I'm going to start out with a little introduction to what donut economics is and a bit about our local chapter of that group, Seattle Donut Economics Coalition, and then I'm going to pass it over to Zoe to tell you more about our Seattle City portrait that we're working on. And so after lunch, maybe you're ready for dessert and you're wondering what is the donut that we mean. I'm guessing probably a lot of you here have at least heard of donut economics based on the overlap with a lot of this bioregional finance work. But if you don't really know too much about it, we're not talking about the pastry, unfortunately. Maybe some of you were excited about that idea. So what is the donut? One of the central parts of the donut is this visualization here. And the idea is it offers a vision of what it means for humanity to thrive in the 21st century. So the visualization consists of 2 concentric circles, with the inner circle representing a social foundation. The idea is to ensure that no one is left falling short of life's essentials, and these are dimensions that are based on UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And then the outer circle represents an ecological ceiling to ensure that humanity does not overshoot the planetary boundaries that protect Earth's life-supporting systems. Okay, great. And that's based on the planetary boundary work that had been done. And so the idea of this is it brings together both the ecological and the social aspects of that we're going to need to achieve to move to a regenerative future. And so here's an example of what that visualization looks like actually filled in with some data. This is based on global data in 2017. And you can see in the center we have lots of red shortfall. Those are the areas where we weren't meeting the social needs of people on the planet. You kind of see certain areas like in peace and justice where maybe we have more red, and so there's more work to be done in getting to the safe and just space. And then the outer circle, you can see there's some gray in there, so those are areas where we don't have great data yet, but also kind of lots of overshoot where we see the red there. And kind of that visualization is one part of donut economics, but there's also kind of another side of it around this mindset. It explores the mindset needed to get us to the ecologically safe and socially just space. And so there's this book that was published in 2017 by Kate Rayworth that presents 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. So guide for how to get us there. And then later, founded in 2019, was the Donut Economics Action Lab, kind of a central group of folks working with folks all around the world, like our local group, to think about how we move our economies in that direction. Just a short overview of some of those principles. One of the biggest things is changing the goal of our economies from one of growth to one of thriving. So from this idea of gross domestic product and infinite increasing size of our economy, kind of under a lot of our current systems, to moving towards one where being within the safe and just space of the donut is the goal, where everyone can thrive. And a lot of the ideas of donut economics are familiar to you probably because they have a lot of overlap with regenerative economics and ecological economics and indigenous ways of thinking. So these aren't new ideas, but kind of maybe new ways of framing that into how we can move forward with them. But kind of some of the central ideas are how we move towards a diverse and embedded economy of socially adaptable humans who can embrace the unpredictability of complex systems and their interconnections, who can work within the cycles of the living world and share opportunities. Had been excited about these ideas and kind of wanting to kind of connect with other folks and make more progress in implementing these ideas locally. Decided to form this local chapter, and kind of we've been having workshops and kind of outreach at science fairs, trying to spread the word with other folks, but also connect with each other, trying to make an impact so we can kind of collectively have more of an impact, and trying to find more collaboration. There's lots of existing work already happening, seeing ourselves as maybe a way to connect, kind of point out where we're falling short or overshooting, and collaborate with folks who are already doing great work and magnify their impacts. And we have different circles of volunteers, from our city portrait work we'll show later, to event planning, to coalition building, kind of always looking for more folks to help us in those different areas. And so one of our main projects has been this Seattle city portrait. So what is this portrait? It's a portrait of place told through both storytelling and data targets and indicators. So kind of using that donut visualization to easily kind of communicate where does our local region sit within that space. And here's a few examples of different places around the world who have kind of created this data portrait for their location. You can kind of see there's a lot of variation in kind of how much storytelling and pictures and kind of how folks want to best capture the communities that they're part of. So we've been definitely exploring how to best do that for our local city and region. And then with that, I'll pass it on to Zoe.
Hi, everyone. And so now I would like to bring you, Megan has given us a huge, kind of a big picture of what the donut is all about. I want to bring us back to Seattle, and here is the Seattle city portrait that we've been working on. And so I'll go through 3 points. Firstly, what forms a donut? What are the data that goes into this beautiful graphic that you see here? And then secondly, I call it a donut unrolled. And as we were collecting data, what are some of the findings that we've had? And what was also very interesting is stories between different metrics, and I would like to highlight some of that to you as well. And then lastly, how can we make the donut whole again? What are some actions that we'd like to take? And so as we go to the next slide, I would like to ask Stephen to also bring us to the website. So this is a website that any of you can access, and you can find the link on our booth or at the last slide of the screen as well. And so as we go to the website, you'll see the same graphic, and you can click on the different metrics, and it will show up some of the data points that we've collected. And when you look at the gray areas, I would like to also say that this is a pilot version of our project, and some data points we're still collecting. And yeah, so when you look in the middle, the red bars are where we have shortfalls in the different metrics in the social foundation. And outside the donut, the red spots are where we have overshoot from an ecological standpoint. Now, going back to the slides, I'm not going to bore you all with, walking through every single metric and every single data that we've collected, but I'd like to dive into, in slide 13 or 14. So I would like to dive into some examples to show you how we are collecting some of this data. So this part is slightly interactive to make sure you're not falling asleep from taco coma. And so any takers, I'm going into the health metric, okay? So one of the input that we have is the average life expectancy. So any takers on what is the average life expectancy in King County? You can shout out the number. 78. 78? 90? That's a lofty goal. Anyone else? 86? 64. Wow. You guys? 80. That's pretty close. It's 81.4. And so you can click to the next slide. Yeah. Oh, okay. And then what is the national average life expectancy? Do you think we're doing better or worse? Better? Yeah, that's good. And yeah, I'll get to that. Very good point. So 77.4 years. So we're actually doing pretty well, right? So instead of patting ourselves on the back and say, oh, we're doing pretty well, let's move on. One of our members actually, she works with the UW Public Health, and she challenges to say, what is the global maximum possible life expectancy if we do away with all risk? And actually, that's the number that Enquita gave us, and that's 90 years. That's a goal that we want to get to. So that's the kind of metric that we're using, and we're falling short of that. But looking beyond that, the lady earlier mentioned, another finding we have is which category has the biggest disparity in life expectancy if we look at the different categories. Any guesses as to which one of these three has the biggest disparities? Very good answers. They all have disparities, but look at the data that we found. I myself personally thought that poverty, economic levels will be a big driver, but there are disparities, but look at the numbers coming from the racial disparities. Unfortunately, there is a 10-year difference in some of these, at least, which actually Brandon kind of touched upon yesterday. And looking to the next slide, you will see that there's a high correlation with race and neighborhoods, and increasingly studies are finding that zip code is a very strong indication of health outcomes. And I don't have this here, but another kind of finding we have is also health access has a high correlations with the racial groups as well as life expectancies. So these are some of the areas that we want to highlight in the data that we find as well, that we don't just look at the headline numbers and say we're doing a good job, but what are some areas that we want to focus on? So related to that, another metric that we look at is temperature. And the city of Seattle has collaborated with the University of Vermont and came up with a study in 2020. And you can see that there's a high correlation with tree canopies and heat during the summer. As you know, Seattle is getting warmer in these years. And there's a 14 Fahrenheit difference between North Seattle and South and Central Seattle. And all we need to do is increase tree canopies. So why are we not doing that? So how can we make the donut whole again? And us as a group, there's already a lot of organization doing the good work. So we really want to partner with different organizations to be able to show them some of these data and say that how can we channel, resources. As we know, it's not just capital, it's also volunteers and people who are passionate about different things. And what is amazing is about the donut economics is we are also part of a global organization. And so many cities are already using this framework for their cities. We've actually spoke to the city of Portland, California, and we recently had a call with Melbourne to learn about what they're doing in their cities as well. And lastly, here we are at the BioFi conference. We would really like to channel resources, money towards the areas that are most needed. And I have a finance background, so one of the words people always ask me is, what is the return on investments? So just using tree planting as an example, there's so many benefits. It's not just about the heat. It increases biodiversity. It reduces greenhouse gas because it improves walkability. It promotes physical health. It improves emotional health. There's studies showing the proximities to trees drives better emotional health. So why don't we invest in these things? And why do we keep talking about financial growth? There's so many social returns that we can have from this. And now I'd like to pass it back to Megan, who would close us up.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So just wanted to say thank you to so many other folks who worked with Zoe and I on this, especially to Hannah Lee and Marsha Beaver, who have contributed a lot to the city portrait data that we showed, Carissa Knipe, who built the interactive donut visual that we showed for a second, and you all can work with after this, and also to Kim Schwarzkopf and Christoph Strauss from our central admin circle, and also Adam Pickard-Skill, too. And just want to share an invitation to join us. Everything we showed here today is definitely in a draft phase, and we'd love to have more opportunities for input from you all and collaborations. We have the right here that will take you to our website. That'll have a link to that interactive donut visual that we showed, and we've also got a table back in the corner over there. Feel free to come visit us, and we've got like some sticky notes where you can put down some ideas there. And we just really invite you to provide your expertise for that Seattle City portrait. If there's certain dimensions that you know a lot about, we'd love to learn from you and improve the data that we're showing as we kind of share out this visual to help folks kind of see what the priorities could be. And collaborations with other groups doing work, trying to make that donut whole again. We'd love to have more of those collaborations. If any of this sounds interesting, please come volunteer with us. We're kind of based in the Seattle area. I'm a little bit afar on Vashon Island, so any folks kind of in this region, if you have an interest, please feel free to reach out. From the QR code, you'll also be able to get a link to our Google group where you can join to get email updates and come to our monthly online meetings. And every few months we have in-person groups, sessions to connect with folks, and just want to get more folks doing this great work locally, kind of connected with each other so we can have more impact together. Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Zoe and Megan. Data science and data-driven policy. Very exciting. The new superheroes, data scientists. So it's interesting, Zoe was talking about, all of these different multidimensional benefits and why maybe our current economies are not valuing some of these. And our next speaker is working on that part of the donut. Austin Wade Smith, I'm very honored to welcome up to the stage, who works with Regen Foundation. And if you haven't heard of Regen Network, they work at the intersection of emerging tech and work with diverse communities, ideas and technologies integrating ecological, economic, and human well-being, and looking at metrics and impact, and how are we valuing impact and enabling grassroots communities to share what it is that they're working on and how to value that. So Austin's going to talk to us about covenants today, which I'm excited because I've seen Austin presenting on all kind of exciting new institutional models that are also integrating the intelligence of more than human beings. So welcome Austin to the stage.
Papa. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Austin Wade Smith. I'm really happy to be here. It's an honor. I'm the executive director at the Regen Foundation, and I also run a project called River Computer. The Regen Foundation catalyzes grassroots institutions for ecosystem regeneration and resilience. And our focus for about the last 4 years has specifically been around how can digital public infrastructure, also known as like a blockchain, support lineages of commoning, and how communities can collectively own, govern, and sense their impact in ecological stewardship. I probably should, but I'm not really gonna give a presentation on Regen Network today, although we have many collaborations in this room and have been working in the Cascadia region. Since 2017, Regen Network is an application-specific blockchain that's dedicated towards being a ledger or a tracker of human environmental stewardship. As a distributed ledger, the validator system that upholds it are bioregionally anchored, and we've been working in this space for quite some time. As such, we've done a fair amount of work in thinking around the relationship of DAOs as a kind of like programmable institution and how they relate to bioregions, and some of the basis of ownership and governance models around bioregional DAOs. I'm not gonna talk about that very much today, but if you're interested, you should scan the QR code. We've also done quite a bit of work exploring the intersection of the Earth Law movement, or the rights of nature movement, with some new fields in economics and technology. So not just non-human standing, but what would happen if we were to integrate the rights of nature movement with regenerative economics and digital addressing systems. So if you're curious about that, you can scan the link. I'll talk a little bit about some of that today. But I'm gonna give a presentation I've never given before, so it might be a little bit rough, and I'm trusting into the fact that you all can ride with me on it. But I'm really excited to share it because it's been a body of work that we've been developing over the last 2 years, and I've never really talked about it. And it seems like it's actually a quite specific use case, a quite specific application to some of the larger questions that are happening around bioregionalism, bioregional economics, regeneration movements, and stuff like that. And the basis of it is on this idea of covenants. And I'm not gonna give a technical presentation, but I definitely could. I'm trying to angle at like walking us through conceptually how to get to what a living covenant is, while abstracting away the sort of technical and interface side of things, but it's all there. So happy to get into some of the details with that. So I'll start with a provocation that says that the current like ecological crisis, or like the meta crisis that we're in, is fundamentally challenging us to redefine like what the social is. And I would argue that the social is effectively like where you draw the line of who gets included. If we take seriously the idea that social life and like nature, like the human world and the more than human world were not separate, then inevitably it becomes a question of like who's included in our social life. And this is actually, it's not just some like natural law, like the social world is actively constructed and contested in an ongoing way. So I think in the process of revisiting and rediscovering our own like social species and what we are as a social species, we're rediscovering a kind of like core contract that I'm gonna argue is like what makes us human. Reciprocity, you could call this like co-capacitance. I think it's essentially the basic idea of regeneration, which is that there's a being, an I, that in stewardship and care to the world that supports me, in kind, it sustains and supports me. This is this loop that we were once really good at doing and we've lost our way on. And so that's kind of like a spoof on the social contract, and I might call that like an eco-social contract. This is like an eco-social contract of reciprocity, or maybe I'll go so far as to call it like a kind of covenant, which is a charged word on purpose. So one of the really interesting things about the work that we've been developing is we typically think about this idea of like reciprocity or regeneration or right relation as a kind of like something that's embedded in your corpus, or like it's a kind of energetic spiritual thing. But some of the work that we've been really focusing on over the last couple of years is exploring how we embed this covenant of reciprocity into other kinds of systems. Like if we take seriously that humans and nature are not separate, then the systems that we built are also living systems at the same time. And so how can we embed this covenant of reciprocity and right relation into our economic thinking, into the computer systems that we design, and even like the laws and like legal policies that we make? And so rather than just holding this idea of regeneration as some intrinsic thing within people, what if we embedded that belief increasingly into the sort of social infrastructure which makes up our world? And I'm not trying to dismiss the sort of like the spiritual potency of how that's held internally. I'm just trying to explore the ways that these different systems could be understood in a way as being like living systems. So one of the focuses for our work has been around how communities collectively govern definitions of value. And how do we underpin and maintain our value systems? How we define what we value says everything about what we hold as important. There is like way more diamonds and gold in our solar system than old growth Douglas firs. If we're just talking about like a scarcity model of like what we peg our value to, like chlorophyll and biocultural old growth is so much more sacred and precious than the minerals that we back our money with. And so maybe this is inviting a kind of question around, well, how is this covenant embedded into the systems of value that we produce? So we typically think around value systems as like a kind of nominal form or like an asset form with like a boundary around it that's fungible, that can kind of move around. And that's the basis of what a commodity is. The commodity is taken from its context and then shipped around and able to move. And there's a lot of like disfiguration and resentment that happens there because people don't want like living systems to be commodified. But what if we were developing a system of value where the value of a thing is precisely because it's from somewhere, it's in context, it's situated. And at the kind of root of regenerative economics is a provocation to say that the value is because it's interconnected and entangled and interdependent. And like, what would you call that kind of form of value? I don't know, maybe like an anti-commodity or something. We're so habituated into auditing things into discrete boundaries that we're like lacking resources to understand from an economic perspective how to define value as anything other than a commodity. So when people get really frustrated with regenerative economics or like credit systems, it's understandable because in a way it just seems like it's an on-ramp to the commodification of the living world, which is not what we're trying to do. Okay, so this covenant, which is being represented by emojis, I guess I could also represent the covenant in emojis, and I'm going to use a lot of emojis, is also like held and anchored in the institutions that we make. Like we make these institutions that are, in theory, a reflection of our value systems, and they uphold them in all these different forms. And I don't particularly like the word institutions, but I'm trying to kind of deterritorialize it or like rediscover it. And it turns out that systems where you can program the basic logic around collective decision-making, governance systems, allocation of resources that Web3 is really good at doing, might be really helpful at us developing new kinds of institutions that can uphold this covenant. So rather than just being like a new wing of the casino, how are we designing institutions that reflect this sort of basic right relation? Kind of the way all movements begin, and these are all photos of projects that I'm actively involved with, my team and I are actively involved with, where we think about this covenant as a kind of container for people to come together to discover how they might work together towards a more resilient future. It's just a container that pushes like the rest of the world out for a second to allow people to discover something together. Yesterday, Martin from Novo mentioned the kind of particularly charged when that's like with an indigenous nation and a set of allies. So what if a covenant is a space, a kind of like tool to create a space where we're discovering what we could do together? Like we're so habituated to think that a hammer is a tool, but like a ceremony or a system of gathering is also a kind of tool. So we're making these covenants as sort of containers for gathering together to discover how some of these new technologies and economic models might be in service to right relation. And we're actually like making these as MOUs. I call them sacred MOUs. Basically, my Google Drive is like full of like blood oaths where we're committing, in this case, my organization with a Maori nation, we're committing to exploring on a path together what would an integration of blockchains and smart contracts look like, be in service to their wairua, which is a Maori word of saying cosmology. And this creates a kind of space, like a kind of somewhat formalized place where we can discover allyship and like how we can work together on something. In the Maori context, my colleagues refer to this as a waka, which is the Maori word for a canoe. So you can think of this like a kind of vessel, like a covenant as a kind of open container or a vessel through in which we're discovering how we can work together and how we might implement different kinds of technologies in service to this right relation premise. Right, so here to the idea of like a living treaty, which is in a way of thinking about like an open container where people can enter into an interaction and like uphold their end of the covenant. So I'm thinking of living treaties as basically an open container for actors to uphold and be supported by the work that they're doing. You can think of it not like a big, heavy institution, but like an agreement that lives out there in the world. And part of the reason that this got me excited early on, I'll go back actually, is in thinking about the number of treaties that, say, in the 19th century in the United States were broken between the US government and indigenous nations. I mean, there's countless numbers of them. The thing is that those treaties weren't broken then. They're being broken every single instance since that happened. Treaties are living things. Contracts are living things. And it brings me a lot of agency to think, well, I should just stop breaking that treaty. It's not like we're going to go back in time. It's continuously happening. And so I like in this idea of integrating the social and the ecological world together, we understand that increasingly what we make are living systems, and we could think of these contracts or these covenants as living things. So this is where it gets kind of interesting with some of the technical dimensions of this. Because, okay, I could structure a contract to say, I promise to hold the line on deforestation in the upper Amazon to prevent logging companies from cutting down old growth trees. I could make a commitment that says I'm going to plant 2 hectares of mangrove trees, or I'm going to engage in surface rehydration efforts in Texas, for example, to replenish an aquifer. You make a kind of commitment, a kind of contract, a promise, and then through the nature of how distributed public infrastructure works, like digital blockchains, that promise is just like running. It's like you're hitting play and it like doesn't turn off. So we're making these promises, these commitments around upholding this core basis of reciprocity, and we're allowing them to just like run openly on a machine that doesn't go off. And that's basically the idea of like a living covenant. So it's like a contract that's like playing, it's living. Again, it's like technically what I'm talking about is embedding a kind of smart contract predicated upon right relation into a way that can't be censored, it can't be taken offline, it can't be debanked by the Trump administration. So this is maybe where it gets kind of extra interesting. I mean, that's the real profundity of some of this, is that it can't be taken offline. It's community-owned and governed. It's sovereign infrastructure. So we're talking about making sovereign contracts that uphold our end of the social deal and returning back to what that means to be a person. Okay, but then this is where it gets kind of extra interesting, is that, well, there's been this whole movement within novel developments for the Earth Law movement, which says non-human entities have the right to flow, the right to stand, they have subjecthood. If a corporation can be a person, why can't a non-human entity? So they have like a legal wrapper of personhood. And it's again contentious, but it's a way of effectively using the court system against itself to be in service to living, to like the broader definition of the social, right? But because we have a legal container, what happens when we actually embed this contract, this covenant, into the body of a non-human entity? So like the tree itself is legally holding the contract that people can enter in and out of. And this is where this is the basis of ecological institutions, and the idea that using some of these emerging digital technologies, we can embed in living systems like other things, like a non-human entity has the capacity to hold a fund of resources, and legally that's happening. And you could take some kind of input, it has some validation system, or it has a covenant. And so we're talking about making a new kind of institutional body that's embedded in the non-human world. It's not just like a human corporation, but a kind of way of embedding funds and sensing systems and contracts into the more than human world. And if this sounds like crazy, then I think my point is getting across, because it's actually possible to do this. We can actually embed in the more than human world, like the ability to have more than just standing. Okay, so I'll basically like close out with saying that there's examples of this that are moving forward. I'm working with a number of different indigenous groups on developing this project. This is Mount Taranaki in Aotearoa, aka New Zealand. This is this incredible conservation boundary around this, and it's also a legal person. So this has the right to sue in its own defense in court in New Zealand through both Commonwealth and Maori law. And we're talking about the potential of what would be like a covenant that's held by the mountain, that if you're stewarding or protecting the mountain, signing a petition, urging against Congress or something, or Parliament to defend it, or actively taking efforts to maintain its biocultural heritage, that you could be rewarded and compensated by the mountain itself. And there's a lot of examples where this is possible. This is currently all the places that we're doing this. And the idea is, okay, we're formalizing this essential social pattern and forming a new generation of institutions that are upholding it. And I like to think of this idea that effectively we could live in a world where there are pools, funds, that are being maintained by a covenant, that any person who chooses to be in right relation with that bioregion, with that entity, could be supported for doing it. And they don't turn off, they don't go away. And it's building a sort of infrastructure or formalized constraints for us to honor our own pact of reciprocity. So I'll leave it at that. One kind of closing thought is we've discussed lots of ways with which capital, philanthropic resources, et cetera, is trying to find its route down to the ground. We're in a moment where there's tremendous wealth transfer, as Cheryl pointed out earlier, and it's lacking routes. It's lacking routes to get down to the ground. That is exactly the way that currents flow with water systems, and it's exactly how electrical systems work. We have a circuit that's ungrounded. It can't go anywhere. And so I think that what we're effectively doing is building a generation of entities and protocols and organizations which are allowing all of this resources to become grounded. And that ground symbol resonates for me. So if you have any curiosity to learn more about ecological institutions and living covenants, I encourage you to reach out to me. We'll be doing some of this with some of the larger BioFi movement in discussion with Ecuador, maybe up here too. So yeah, thanks for your time.
Love your, fantastic, Austin. Great emoji usage. So much potential. So yeah, I'm going to give a little plug. Maybe Austin won't, but if you are interested to learn more about rights of nature and the intersection of ecological institutions, Austin has written some fantastic blogs. So definitely, if you get a chance to read. So in speaking with our relationship with nature and how we're assigning value and developing new models of the ways that we respect that, I'm really excited. I've met a few of the team members of Kwaxala, Gavin Woodburn and Alex Gordon-Brander. And Gavin, who's going to start us off with Kwaika Nation, is leading incredible work in Canada, just north of us here, our neighbors. Thank you for making the trip down with the crazy border, as everyone has mentioned. But the Kwaika Nation is one of the smallest, but very mighty, bringing together multiple stakeholders and integrating indigenous forestry management techniques, emerging tech, ancestral wisdom, and regenerative forestry practices. And they have some incredible things to share with us today. So please welcome Gavin and Alex. Slide down. I didn't manage to fix it yet.
Yo, Gela Kazla. Nugwa Gavin, Gayuch Lacha Kwecha, Gayuchin Lach Matsenach. So thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Gavin, and I'm Kwaika First Nation from the traditional village site of Matseno, which is located in the Great Bear Rainforest of the Northwest Coast. It's about an hour-and-a-half boat ride northeast from Campbell River to get to, and this is where our people have been for thousands of years. It's a sad story because, as you mentioned, we're one of the smallest nations in British Columbia. And this is most colonial practices that involved displacing us from our land through excessive resource extraction of clear-cutting forests and mining our territories. And so what happened was it removed our people from the land, but that also meant we had to spread out across the island. So it's according to Indigenous Services Canada that we are 19 members, but the people that trace back to Kwaika is in the thousands. It's very large. And right now, we're in the process of trying to get back to our territory, trying to be stewards of our territory again. And how we're doing this is by starting companies such as Kwaxala. At Kwaxala, I'm one of the directors and the Indigenous Science Advisor there. And what we've done is been able to buy out the forestry licenses in the territory to protect 18,000 acres of land and create the Massanuck Conservation Stewardship. Thank you. And by creating these companies that are co-founded and Indigenous majority owned, like Kwaxala, we're able to support our own nation. But we want to do more than just support our own nation, because there are ways to protect it and try to help us establish this stewardship economy. But we realize if we want to create global impact, we have to create a structure that can go beyond just Quaker to bring us all together. And so I would like to talk more about this presentation from someone who we've brought in to this area to help us in this section of regenerative finance. And Alex Gordon-Brander here, he's spent decades in this area of regenerative finance and has had a very successful career in Wall Street. And so without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to you to talk a bit more about Kwaxala and what we're doing to help this stewardship economy.
Thanks, Gavin. We practiced that one for an hour. So it's a real honor to stand up here today and have a chance to talk about the work that we've been doing. And this is, like Austin's, forgive me, it's the first time presentation, because we talked a lot about the work that Gavin spoke about. There's been 3 years of government engagement to create a legal pathway to extractive licenses that run into hardcore legal protection for the land that can act as a template for generating revenue from ecosystem credits. And this is a really profound and good story, and I'll touch on it today, but I want to take the opportunity of here today to talk about something even a little bigger than that, and that is the nature of money itself. So I wear this coin around my neck. It was a gift, which is an Alexander the Great tetradrachm that was minted in Ephesus in about 325 BC. And the folks in Ephesus had not heard of Alexander, and probably not even Macedonia a couple years before. And yet pretty much the known world by the end of his life was using his face on their coinage. And I wear this to remind me that money is and always has been a colonial technology, that colonizing starts with the swords and the chariots and the guns, but it's the money system that keeps the colonial power structures in place. And so, flashing forward over 5,000, 7,000 years of money systems, while money has always been about power, money more abstract over time, going from seashells to metals to paper to bits and bytes. It's become more inflationary, particularly since we left gold behind 50, 60 years ago. The backing currency by debt means that currency now requires more and more growth to keep going, and colonizer currency driving extraction is an engine underneath and around everything we're doing. And, we all know where this is leading us, and these are a bunch of problems we can't solve on their own without actually addressing the generator function beneath. So, how do we solve this? I wish the answer was as simple as Bitcoin. It's not, for reasons everyone understands, but Bitcoin does actually point the finger at a possibility, which is the creation of a $3 trillion new currency and asset class in the space of 10 or 15 years, shows that you can upend the existing system with something new if it is well constructed and if it makes sense. It's not Bitcoin. What would it be? Well, a nature-backed currency if one could create a nature-backed currency that could actually scale, that profitably attracted capital from the fiat system, it was built around legal mechanisms for nature protection and regeneration. It intrinsically made nature more valuable living than dead, and its seigniorage went to indigenous stewards. That's a currency term, the value of gold goes to the gold miners. Well, that's the seigniorage goes to indigenous stewards. This could be a global nature-backed currency that would be able to bind all of the individual bioregional stewardship economies in the world into a single global nature state. So this brings us back to Quaker and what's been happening in Masunuk. So these four sort of wings of a stewardship economy needs to be truly regenerative. Well, this is amazingly, the process of converting tenures is over 100 times more capital efficient than purchasing land to do the same amount of protection. So it's got heavy scalability. Most of the forest land in BC, and in fact most of the primary forest in the world, is on government land. So, but this has been regenerative. It's profitable because even at current prices, when you convert the logging license into an ecosystem service license, you create an asset that's worth 2 or 3 times as much. It's got strong legal rights around it because we're actually converted the extractive legal unit into the right to regenerate, and it's indigenous owned and centered, and Kwaxala is enshrined in its governance to always be indigenous majority owned and governed. So this template here, Quaker created Kwaxala to scale, and I'm not going to go through the big diagram here in detail, but the point being we've created a platform and a fund where other nations can bring sovereign forestry projects in, and the Kwaxala platform creates a consolidated sales pipeline for the carbon and also a funding pipeline, because we've created a fund structure that sits on top of the projects and essentially allows them to be funded by family office impact capital as opposed to being funded by carbon development, which saves a considerable amount in terms of the financing costs. So there's a couple of bits of just sort of economic engineering and magic in this that make this a very scalable model. Both the fact that the tenures are cheap relative to carbon and the fact that we can access cheap capital to scale. So this is great. We could scale this, perhaps we could scale this over the whole world. But that brings us to the question that we started the conversation with, which is, but with what kind of money? If we even manage to scale this globally and we're making indigenous nations rich in colonizer dollars and participating more fully in that economy, we're still tied to the eventual fate of the fiat economy. And we know what that is. So we created the century, which is a nature-backed currency, and 1 century is essentially equivalent to a 100-year-old tree being protected. And there's actually a more complex ecological formula behind it, but conceptually, a century, which we think will be costing somewhere between 40 cents and $1, when each of them is protecting 100 years of old-growth tree life. And the currency is created when nature's legally protected, and fundamentally its value is the intrinsic value of the nature protection itself. And this is a really important point that Austin touched to earlier, that as long as we're treating the value of nature just as the value of the ecosystem services that can be pulled out of it, it's still just another level of colonialism. Well, Century says, those services are going off into the Living Forest Fund. This is just the intrinsic value of the protection itself. Okay, so this sounds all well and good, but you actually need to have an economy for a currency to flow through, and you need to have incentive mechanisms to give value to it. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me a second with the diagram with the charts and boxes. It'll be over in about 30 seconds for those of you who find this painful. But the idea here is that when a nation brings a forest, a piece of primary nature that they want to protect, to an agent like Kwaxala, but it could be a different bioregional agent, could be protecting coral reefs as much as forests. The agent certifies the project and certifies that it is actually being legally protected under the right kind of stewardship over the right timelines, and there's a foundation that oversees that. This sort of acts kind of like the Federal Reserve does to agents like Kwaxala being issuing banks. The sentries are issued, and then the agent distributes those sentries partly out into the market to fund the cost of protection, and to the extent there's more left over, going onto the nation's balance sheet. And as a note, that's providing income over time. Those sentries are distributed throughout the lifetime of protection. So what gives this thing financial teeth is that corporations need to buy carbon credits to meet their compliance needs. And an important point I should mention, I skipped over the carbon credits, but these are not only the credits being created by these projects, not only the most premium credits that you can get, but they're now compliance eligible. And so we've got top-grade carbon credits. We have corporations that need to buy them. But Kwaxala will cut brokerage fees if they're bought with sentries. And so the corporations are going to need to buy sentries, essentially, to participate in their best way in the carbon market. And that creates both a price floor for sentries, which creates a market intrinsic value for the protection of nature, and at the same time, it gets the sentries out in circulation and supports people, creates a market that the nation can sell their own sentries into. So that's a lot. There's a lot here. I'll be taking questions more later, but just stepping back, and obviously then the carbon income flows to the nation. So stepping back, what we've done is put together a full stack financial system that matches the financial system that you find in the extractive nation state, where on top of land rights like extractive licenses, you get commodity economies, you have companies that have...
Exposing the battery. Thank you so much, Gavin and Alex. We are now going to transition into a little interaction, and feel free to stand up and take a stretch. But what we're going to do is we're going to let's put 2 minutes on the clock, maybe a little music from the audio maestro. We're going to bring chairs up here. We're going to bring up Austin, Gavin, Alex, and Megan and Zoe up to the stage, and then we're going to have... I'm told we had some volunteers for assist with roving mic. Raise your hand if you were voluntold. If not, can we have kind of a Vanna White mic walker that's willing to go around the audience? I see Marianne. I see perfect Susanna. You two would be fantastic. So we'll take a very brief 2-minute stand up, and then we'll arrange the chairs here for the panel, and then take this couple of minutes as well. If you saw anything in the presentations, if you don't know what a DAO is, if you're not that clear on Bitcoin and how this ties to BioFi and regenerative economics, please remember and hold that question. And in 2 minutes, we'll have the lovely Susanna and Marianne walking around with our roving microphone to come. And please, we would love your questions and participation for our wonderful speakers to further dive into this, because it is a collaborative operation of all these new ideas and how we bring them into being. So 2 minutes, and we'll be coming around for questions.
enterprise because it's using a gargantuan amount of energy to maintain itself, you're correct. Its validity is a thermodynamic basis. It's like proof of work. So basically, the more it's based off of just like burning fuel, that's fundamentally problematic, and no viable environmental effort could ever work on a proof of work blockchain, basically. But there are many ways that you can develop blockchain. So the basis of a blockchain is that it's like a ledger, like a spreadsheet that you would have like on your laptop, but then rather it being owned by a Google Cloud, like owned by a company that's mining it, it's not owned by any particular entity, but it's a distributed ledger that's upheld by a number of different actors that are holding a copy of it at the same time. And they work through a process called like consensus making, where everyone makes sure they hold the same copy of it. And that consensus process is the process that can be energy intensive. The blockchain that we've developed and that like Alex is affiliated with are called proof of stake. So it's effectively like six orders of magnitude less energy intensive. So it's not more energy intensive than like Visa systems or like ACH payment. So basically, the energy expenditure to maintain the blockchain is kind of a null issue if you don't do the proof of work thing with Bitcoin. What it allows is, for the first time, a network of actors to all hold the same like account that isn't intermediated by some authority that's doing it for you, like the US government, or some entity that has the power to maintain that. So you're able to create a common record held by any number of parties where the trust is not trustless, it's that the trust is distributed amongst all the people holding the copy. And in doing that, you can begin to then say, okay, well, we don't need a federal government or a central entity to administer and oversee the financial policies. Like, it's a peer network of actors are all holding that together. And so you can think of it as a kind of continuation of the peer-to-peer movement, and you can design systems of value in a number of ways. Like, maybe we're moving into a space where we understand that in the 20th century, there was only what we inherited as our value system, like the US dollar was backed by gold, and now it's backed by brute force, basically, or just memes. Like, we just believe it, and the US, they'll come after you if you question that. And we're entering into a phase where people can design what they want to back their currency with. There can be multiple currencies. There could be a currency for a bioregion or for a guild of a certain set of interests or something like that. So it's like a collective design question. What do we back our value systems with? And we're doing various experiments on what that looks like.
I'll just add, did you want to say something?
I just want to say that was great, and I'm so glad the mic passed over me. But now I have it just for a second. So this idea, different currencies, these new digital currencies, have different sort of units of account. So there is a currency for file storage that is sort of measured in the amount of data stored. There are currencies for sort of Wi-Fi bandwidth and things. And these are sort of semi-tangible things that are tied, but not as tangible as primary nature. And so, the mechanism here is to say, let's unitize something else. Let's unitize an actual unit of ecological protection. And wouldn't it be nice if someone thought this was a coin, hey, let me give you 100-year-old trees. Let me give my daughter, a couple acres of trees, tree protection for her graduation. So there is a piece of this which is about a meme, because fundamentally currency is only a story and a mechanism. And so the blockchain creates a mechanism. There are loads of people trying to hang stories on those mechanisms, but you actually need to have more than just a story and more than just a tech, and have some economic activity, and that's sort of the work that we're doing.
Like, just as a reminder, like when the internet came out and they had like ACH payments for Visa, like that was a total mess. Like, credit cards on the internet when it first came out was an absolute disaster. And so like
people said it would never actually happen.
Right, yeah. So it's an interesting thing to be like, can we enter into a phase where it's not purely a speculative system that's just a new wing of the casino, but people are actually developing solidaristic tools with this. But it's not unprecedented for this stuff to be messy.
I will just also add, having worked in cryptocurrency and blockchain emerging technology for 10 years, it is a very vast rabbit hole. So please feel free to reach out to your techie folks and friends to get resources, and happy to share some libraries and links for those of us who are still kind of like learning about this and falling down the rabbit hole. I just want to add as well, in addition to money and currency and value and new economic models, there's also a lot of very interesting things we can do with governance and tokenization around signal preference and using that to allocate resources, and a whole huge world of expression that we can have in signal preferencing, and doing it in ways that are in real time even. One analogy one of my colleagues says, like, if you touch a hot stove, you know, you recognize and you pull your hand back, but in our current systems, we touch a hot stove and it takes 4 years for us to do anything about it. And it's like our governance systems are basically like an Atari. They have the signal processing of an Atari, and we definitely need an upgrade. So happy to have that conversation also later on. Any other?
Say what signal preference is.
Signal. Okay, you want to signal your preference. We want to eat lunch, okay? Do we want Indian? Do we want Korean food? Do we want taco truck outside? So there's ways that you can express your preference. We don't need an app, you know, to decide what to eat for lunch. Hopefully there's 6 of us, but at a certain scale, there's mechanisms that we are creating with these new technologies where we can start to have collective signal preferencing, like a collective intelligence network processing, like mycelial networks, where we can all start to collaborate at a bigger scale, that we can't just have that conversation with 6 people. That's another tale. I see a hand in the room. This gentleman has a burning question. Oh, okay.
Oh, you can go first.
And if you want to address a particular panelist or ask a general question, and they will pick someone.
Thanks. I'll try to be clear with this question. I get the new economic models, the signal preferencing. I think I'm unclear on the between now and then. Like, I see the vision, but I'm wondering how, like, I don't see, like, in your diagram with Sentry, how we incentivize the corporation to retain the value from the holders of Sentries back to the corporation. Like, I don't get that part, and I'm trying to figure out how we can start things right now that are system, like, wide, that will, when we get to the place that we have enough volume of understanding around it, that it will pressure and actually change that value set. Because right now, from my opinion, we have this asset bubble globally that is monopolized, and it's gonna be a fight to figure out how to, like, change that value.
Great questions. And like the first answer is, I don't know. Like, this is all unfolding, you know, it's all unfolding as we look, and ain't nobody in this room knows where anything's going. And the way I look at this, though, is, you know, corporations will change their behaviors based on their own incentives, and there are other paths to sort of changing corporation incentives by changing the signaling that consumers do, which is also about capturing hearts and minds, and then gets political, and there's a whole slew of stuff there. I want to do something quite simple, which is just at least leverage the existing mandates that the corporations have, where they have to participate in this carbon economy, to leverage that to start to create a floor value for Sentries, because I believe once there's a sort of a stable value that 100-year-old growth is worth this much, people get used to it, then those things tend to build, and there's an opportunity for that value to actually inhere. Oh, wait a minute, there's a way we can recognize the value of old growth. So the corporations may take a lot longer to change than actually that piece. And I want to just add one thing that's kind of cool about this, which is in most sort of money design, it's all about thinking about the value of the future. And a financial asset, you know, it's debts and discounting cash flows and all that. And the idea of a Sentry is that we're actually monetizing the past. We're monetizing growth that this ecosystem did And there are some fun sort of things that flip in terms of what would it look like to operate within that economy. And, you know, there's about a 1% growth rate of centuries because, you know, a stand of trees gets 1% closer to another century older every year. And that provides a low but consistent return rate that creates a 100-year more sort of like discounted capital time versus like the 5 or 10 years you get when you're borrowing money. So there's a bunch of interesting features where it's really about can we do the magic trick of having the world think of this as money, just like Bitcoin managed to do that magic trick, just like gold did that magic trick years ago, and then provide enough support under it that if we do, it creates the kind of economic activity we want.
So, oh, that's very loud. My question was around, you mentioned the fact that the blockchain has a more robust governance structure, right, compared to, it can't be censored by a central government or anything like that. So I'm interested in understanding how the blockchain avoids falling into the same pitfall of you have a different governance structure, but it's not, but why is it better, right? Like, is it fundamentally supported by democracy? Like, you know, people could say maybe the US democracy is failing right now or is struggling or on life support, wherever you want to look at it. How do we avoid a similar problem in like a Web3 world, and how does the infrastructure provide any value in doing that?
I guess I'll just step up to this one, and then if anyone else wants to add in. I'm not suggesting that I'm very nervous about coming across as like a blockchain maximalist. I'm actually like a major skeptic. I think that's why I'm trying to be good at my job, because I don't think it's good for all things. It's not by its inherent nature good at governance. There's nothing good about its governance. Most Bitcoin and Ethereum doesn't really have much governance in it. So it's more like the fact that you can specify the rules around how people make decisions together and have those embedded into the tech, into the infrastructure itself. So things can't happen unless an agreement is made amongst a group of people. So it's less like it's better, but it creates a sandbox where people can test out different kinds of governance systems. Maybe there's a delegation where I'm going to say, this person has more expertise than I do, so I'm going to delegate my vote to them. It could be a weighted thing where I have greater seniority or have more stake in the project or something like that. Like systems like liquid democracy. So I would generally argue that we're living in the shell of democracy. It's like it's not really there anymore. Maybe that's not that spicy of a take. And because there isn't any way for there to be a feedback loop where the process is updated based off of people's sentiment, there isn't an iterative process. That's possible.
Voting,
right?
But
and then it's
kind
kind of
fallible, of course,
and hence why that's being attacked,
Right.
gerrymandering and things like that. So I would suggest that the ability for decision making, there's this kind of annoying term, subsidiarity, which is to say that decision-making power should be held by those most affected by the consequence of that decision. That seems to me like a general golden rule as good governance. And the further and further we get away from that, I think the less and less helpful it is. And so, I mean, what it's producing is an entire field and an entire science around how we collectively organize and govern ourselves that isn't just delegated to some, government or corporation that knows better. People are sandboxing and testing out how do we collectively want to organize ourselves. And in that sense, it offers a continuation of the commoning movement or of cooperatives and collective decision-making processes on a level that's never been able to be accessed.
So what I'm hearing is that the unique value of the technology is that the regulatory and policy element of governments is more tightly integrated into the infrastructure itself, and therefore there's a tighter feedback loop between the democratic constituents who are hopefully collectively coming up with what that regulatory policy is and the actual implementation and enforcement of that policy baked into the system. Is that an accurate?
In broad strokes, I don't think that's far off.
Okay.
You're ultimately not relying on a trusted that then the government's going to, your elected official is going to do what you're asking them to do. That's a trust system there that you're like, well, in good faith, you're going to do what I elected you to do. And in part of, to extend what you said is that it's like, it's automatically executed. Like,
I do
it's
still
not
think
deferring.
I do still think you have that representative problem in the sense that, you know, we're not all going to become experts on blockchain
Right.
overnight, and so there's going to be some, you know, subset of the population who are designated as stewards of this system.
Yeah.
And there's going to be that same trust relationship between us and them as there's between us and like our senators.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So.
totally. It's still relationships with human beings interacting with each other.
Of course, yeah. I guess like. Yeah.
Just the one thing that the blockchain definitely does give you is a different level of transparency. And there's a transparency and you know that the things haven't been messed with after the fact because there's trail. And that's a minor thing, but it's not
I mean, we have the Freedom of Information Act, which does something similar. It's not everyone knows how to use it, and it's like definitely got issues, but.
Okay, we have a question over here.
But anyway, sorry, thank you so much, appreciate you.
I might have missed this in the original presentation. I have two questions. One is, what sort of assets were used to buy the land for the Kwaxala project?
Shall I answer that one first?
Yes.
Yeah. So, firstly, what's interesting is no one bought the land because, like 92% of the forest land in British Columbia, it's crown land that belongs to, I guess, King Charles. So, what they did was bought the logging licenses that sit on that land that off a logging company balance sheet. And those licenses run about $100 to $150 an acre versus like premium private forest land runs 10 to 15,000 an acre. So it's like 100x difference versus buying the land. It's working on the rights level, sort of the leasehold level, not the freehold level. But nonetheless, it still took money.
Okay.
So we primed the pump with a philanthropic donation from BC Parks. Do you want to say anything more on that?
Was it Canadian dollars?
Yeah. Yeah, no, remember that? No, okay. So basically those Nature United and BC Parks came together to fund the original TFL purchase. And then that sort of then gives us the ability to sell this first lot to raise cash for the next and then just kind of keep cycling money in the machine.
Okay. I have a separate offline question now that I know that information. The second question is, what did you face when you were looking at creating valuation for that land territory? And how did you come up with where you landed?
So two valuations. There's the on the way in and on the way out. So the valuation for the tree farm license was a negotiation with the forestry, I mean, it's a tripartite negotiation with the government and the forestry company. But those licenses kind of have an established accountancy book value and they have a kind of market value. So, you know, this is within some bounds. The more interesting question is the pricing of then the living forest shares. And, you know, we basically, it's pretty much a yield flow-through vehicle that when the carbon credits are sold, there's a top-line revenue that goes to the nation for stewardship, and then the rest is basically dividends. And so we've just gone out to the market and looked at different people's yield appetite and picked a yield range that seems to be in people's appetite, and then at a certain point, hopefully there'll be a market price for this and we won't have to pick prices. Oh, and right now we're doing a fixed offering that has roughly a 5% yield based on current carbon prices, which we expect to go up.
Just want to open some space before the next question for Seattle Donut Economics. I'm curious, just to open up some space, as you haven't had a chance to ask questions, of how do you view governance and emerging technologies and these kind of new emerging currencies in integrating with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think so much of it is just like engaging with the communities on the ground. I think that we're talking about kind of different ways of governing, and sociocracy is something that we're in our group we're enacting, and we definitely know it's not. Nothing's perfect, and you have to figure it out kind of with your own community how it works well, and then kind of figuring out the way to scale that, and depending on the community that you're working with. And so I think we're trying to do our best at that on this local scale. What do you have to add, Zoe?
Yeah, and just to add that, some of the metrics that go into our dimensions, right? Like, how do we come up with some of those, and what is important for the communities? And one thing that we learned from the Melbourne Donut is that they created study groups, for each and every one of their metrics, bringing in, like as Alex mentioned earlier, some are academic experts and some are community players, right? Like, how do we include all the voices? We're not quite at the level that you guys are all talking at, but we're just maybe collecting people and coming on a Zoom call and kind of talking through things. But yeah, one of the points you mentioned earlier, signaling, right? That could be a good one to also implement and, start getting ideas together as well.
One more thing that's on my mind, as someone who works in data management, I think I see the value of information sharing and kind of the potential value in a lot of that data, and how folks who maybe have certain information and it's extracted from them and not necessarily valued, and how can we maybe use some of the new technologies to kind of to have that value recognized to the folks who are putting that energy into creating that value, and also and having incentives for that information. Like we're saying our donut is based, like we're trying to collect a lot of information, engaging in folks, kind of helping us build this picture. But the more that we can kind of compensate them, or kind of that value is recognized through those systems, and through blockchain or kind of other sort of systems that recognize that value in a cooperative way of compensation, I think I get personally very excited about.
Back there first, and then hi, I'm Ann Jacobson. I wanted to just contribute to the conversation because a lot of the things that were coming up are something that I personally I'm involved with. I'm actually running for Seattle City Council this year, position 9. I'm really excited to talk to the Seattle economics. I'm presenting a campaign that's all about systemic change, opening up the local legislative process, relying on data and statistics to figure out the most functional way to solve these issues. That's my niche, right? I've understood that this is a collaborative effort. There's only certain things that I study, but in response to the transitional question, this is a space that I do occupy, because I have found over the years that a lot of this stuff is very common sense. It's not that complex, but when trying to develop spread, we meet up with the programming and the hypnosis that I call it hypnosis that we're under as a community. And that's particularly in local politics. When one of you mentioned that we need a new system, that's one of my main arguments, is that I believe we've outgrown representation. We don't need to have a middleman walking around talking to the communities. We can give the communities the mic, right? So there's a really interesting opportunity right now. I describe it as I'm going into the space that everyone is looking, expecting to find answers, and identifying this space as no longer functional. It's nobody's fault. This is a symptom of evolution. But I think it's really important to remember that it can seem like such a big change, but really what we're facing is buy-in and understanding. And that's why running a council campaign is interesting to me, because it's an opportunity to disrupt that trend that most people understand is not working. And another main message of the campaign is that I'm framing this as a renaissance rather than a revolution. I'm more like in the labor movement, I'm a longshoreman, so I occupy a lot of different worlds. But in that sense, if we frame it as a renaissance, as a celebration of information in this age of enhanced ability and access, in the context of a call for healing for selves and the planet, it's actually really quite simple, and it's fun, right? It's easy to get buy-in when we understand that the information has already kind of been accessible. It's a remembering of our ancient wisdom, and it's just so in line with this space. I just wanted to offer that to the conversation. Just, there are pieces that are gonna come to the table that are gonna fill in those gaps, and we all see the same vision. So I'm excited to talk to you guys.
There's a meme, you can jump on the meme wagon of Regenaissance that's floating out in the in the noosphere.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on kind of the last pieces of this conversation leads into the question that I was going to ask with some of the work that I'm doing in Colorado with regards to bringing forward the research gap that can be filled with microremediation in Colorado for the produced water that they're looking to bring forward to the municipalities and to all of us, which is so kind of in line with the new vibe. Instead of resisting and spending the time pointing the finger, to bridge and just invite what's the potential for microremediation if you are going to feed up this water, to put it through nature first. So I'm wondering if there's systems like that, and then also for waters in the same way like the trees and the other things, like if water is a specific one that can be brought forward that can be tied into like the work that Elizabeth is doing with the water unity networks, where we can align and know what current we're a part of according to the watershed, but then also understanding that the carbon is really the symptom when we could fix the actual problem and have this light fulfilling the full water cycle again.
Thank you so much for your questions. And I think that's a really great point. And while today we sort of talked about Kwaxala from this currency perspective, at its core, Kwaxala is really a tool for independent nations to be able to protect and regenerate their communities. And what I do as a PhD student is I do indigenous science. And I do indigenous science by adopting a three-eyed seeing lens, which is you take your Western lens, your indigenous lens, but then the lens of the environment. So you're listening to the environment so that you can be a voice for that. It was actually great. Someone was talking earlier about how giving rights to natural land and rivers to be recognized as persons. And I think when it comes to indigenous science, the biggest difficulty is changing that paradigm of Western science is the only way to approach and solve a problem. And so having something like a blockchain where we can store data, we can actually track our indigenous science, indigenous voices, and uplift indigenous science so that we can change and approach these problems in a different way. And so I think it's a great point, and remembering that these are all tools for a way to uplift some of these voices that are lost, to be able to solve these problems that we all want to.
Maybe if I can build on that, this has come up multiple times throughout this weekend, but I think it's a really clear point that should be discussed more, is the basis of bioregionalism is following how water moves effectively. Like the shed is like the line where things part, right? And so we can think about this effectively as like aligning many different social and technical systems towards like water cycle patterns and following the watershed. Or we could talk about our economy as a value shed, and that we're learning to like collectively organize these systems that we use to orchestrate ourselves around like essentially the water's sacred cyclical behavior. And we're like discussing, is there a legal way to do that, a technical way to do that, an economic way to do it, but like the watershed in that cycle is like learning how to have these systems participate in that cycle. And one of the clearest ways that has been part of the success of the bioregional meme is to say like, well, let's organize ourselves along the contours that the earth already gives us, which are the watershed lines, right? And that makes so much sense, it's crazy, and it's so incredibly simple. And we'll talk, like people are actively talking about making regenerative currencies that are backed on the water's cyclical behavior. So like evidence that water's been able to cycle multiple times is an index of so many other, basically it's like, it's a universal solvent of life, so it reflects like the lifeness of a place, just such a deep part of us. And there is this paradigm where we can really knob twist and explore together how we organize ourselves with this sort of deeper knowledge around water, say, like intact. It's exciting.
going to slowly start to close. So if you have really burning questions, we probably are time for about 2 more. So I welcome the next question.
I have a question to Megan and Zoe. So I saw your presentation and you recognize this problem in local level, the discrepancy between zip code, but I felt like that kind of problem is kind of manifestation of like big system problem, and you just told us that like you are still trying to do some local mobilization. So I want to hear more about like what kind of like local organizing you are doing and how you stay empowered to deal with like this kind of big system changes. So.
I guess I'll say, Mike, knowing how involved you are in the, is that working? Well, a great question, Mike. I think like knowing how involved you are in the cooperative movement. I think we're trying to. I think just we're still at the early stages of we see ourselves maybe as a way of bringing together folks across these different like kind of economic, social, ecological sort of spectrums locally, and I'm just like not that we've made any sort of like transformations yet, but I think we're very much at the beginning of trying to just like having conversations and maybe trying to engage folks, and like we have these different dimensions of the donut and engaging folks in conversations and happen to move us forward, and then how can we then share once we have that data in this donut and then get it in front of where does financing go within this like bioregional financing perspective, and where are the government and policymakers starting to think about things, and how can we kind of use the donut to help highlight things to them. So I think right now I think it's mostly a communication tool in trying to like have those conversations across maybe folks who haven't been in those same rooms together. What do you have?
Yeah, so that is a very good question and something we're still trying to figure out and sourcing ideas from everyone as well, right? So as we are collecting data, so a lot of the data comes from Seattle City, King County, Washington State. So that's how we're starting to first make the initial contact, right? And we realize that a lot of these don't have specific targets yet. And then we are also collaborating, we want to collaborate with other people as well. So we're still trying to learn. So in Melbourne, what they did is they start from the community and they have nonprofit funding to begin with. And because the work that they're doing is so powerful, the government part of these projects as well. So that's one approach. And I know we have communities of opportunity in Seattle as well, which is a collaboration between King County and Seattle Foundation. So there's a lot of different approaches that we are still trying to figure out. So that's an area that, yeah, we're still in the early stages.